Hello everyone! Welcome to today's webinar on setting up and managing food court. This is Belle from the Academy team. In this video, we will dive into what food court restaurant service mode is and some common setups you will encounter. Here's a quick overview of the topics we'll be covering today. First, we will explore what defines a food court restaurant service mode. Then, we will focus on the menu setup, specifically on how to configure vendors, which is a setting unique to food court restaurants. And lastly, we will look into managing reports to let both vendors and food court owners can access to the correct information from their respective views. So, are you ready to learn more about our food court setup? Great! Let's begin with a quick introduction to what a food court is and how it differs from other restaurant service modes. Actually, food court mode is quite similar to quick service, as both operate under a self-service setup. However, a food court functions on a larger scale with multiple vendors, each operating their own store or service counter. Customers can order their meals either at the individual vendors or through a central cashier. Then, after placing an order, pages are often distributed to notify them when their meals are ready for collection. For additional reference, you can check the diagram on this page, which highlights other common modules used in a food court setup. Then, once you understand what a food court is, the next step is to decide on the type of setup you would like to implement. Typically, in a food court setting, you will have multiple vendors along with a central cashier. However, you can also customize the setup to fit your own specific workflow. Here are some common configurations. Order and pay at vendors, order at vendors, pay at central cashier, or order and pay at central cashier. And no matter which configuration you choose, it is important to ensure that the relevant POS are correctly assigned as either vendors or central cashier. This way, everything will function smoothly, especially when it comes to menu setup or report viewing. To assign the POS to the correct parties, we will need to access the merchant portal. First, go to Modules, select POS, License. If your food court has multiple vendors, you should have more than one POS license here. So, just click on the relevant POS device you want to configure. Then, under General section, you will find a drop-down next to Vendor. From this drop-down, select whether this POS should assign to the central cashier or a specific vendor in your food court. If you don't see any vendors available in the drop-down, don't worry, this is normal because the vendors haven't been set up yet. I will then walk you through how to set them up when we discuss menu setup later. Now, under the general settings, you will also find two options that are exclusively available for food courts. Only show order from this POS and enable order printing from other sources on secondary POS. For only show order from this POS, enable this option if you want this POS to display only the orders made on it. For example, if you want to hide orders placed on other POS devices, like those at the central cashier, you can turn this setting on. While for enable order printing from other sources on secondary POS, this setting controls whether the secondary POS should print tickets for orders coming from modules such as kiosks or online sources. Normally, only the primary POS handles ticket printing from external sources. However, when this setting is enabled, the secondary POS can also print these orders, which means the staff handling the primary POS won't need to manually pass the tickets to the secondary POS. Then, once you have finished configuring these settings, click Save and you have now successfully assigned and configured the POS for the vendor or central cashier. And this is how it will appear on the POS. When an order is placed from the central cashier, the order will include items from all vendors. However, on each vendor's POS, you will only see the items specific to that vendor's menu. This ensures that vendors only manage their own orders without confusion from other vendors' items. Okay, next, let's move on to the menu setup for the food court setting. As usual, there are two methods to set up menu items: creating items one by one and bulk importing items. For detailed steps on how to create menu items, you can refer to our menu setup video, as the process for creating food court menu items is similar to setting up menu items for full-service restaurant and quick-service restaurants. However, there is one important note. When setting up items, under the Role Access Permission section, ensure that you only grant access to the relevant roles. For example, if you are setting up a chicken burger for the Western food store, make sure that the access is turned on only for the Western food store staff and central cashier staff. This ensures that only the right teams can manage and process the relevant orders. Alright, now, after you have completed the menu setup, don't forget about vendor setup. In a food court configuration, it is essential to also configure vendors. This not only allows you to create separate menu items, but also enable you to establish different workflows and generate specific reports that are relevant to each individual store. By setting up vendors, you ensure that each vendor will only see the menu items and reports for their own store, keeping everything organized and streamlined for both the vendor and the food court management. To set up a vendor, you will need to use the Merchant Portal. On the left panel of your Merchant Portal, go to Menu Setup, select Vendor. At the top right, click on Add Vendor to add a new vendor. To allow the vendor to receive online orders, enable in operation. Take note that when this option is disabled, the vendor won't be able to accept online orders. Although your customer can still browse the menu, but they won't be able to place their orders. To display the menu on the order taking screen, enable Show on Menu. Then, complete the basic vendor information by uploading an image, entering the vendor name, a brief description, the restaurant address, phone number, operation dates and time, and the cuisine type offered by the vendor. Once the basic information is filled in, click on the Included Categories tab. Here, you will select the category relevant to the vendor. For example, if this vendor sells Western food, you should only select the Western food category. And remember, once a category is assigned to one vendor, it can no longer be assigned to another vendor, as each category can only be linked to a single vendor. Finally, navigate to the Permissions tab. Set up the application permissions and the staff roles according to the vendor's need. Then, once everything is set, click on Save to confirm the vendor setup. After you're done setting up all the vendors, don't forget to assign the vendor to the specific role under Role Permission 2. For example, this role here is a staff from the Western food store, and hence, I will assign him as Western food store vendor. And now, once you log in into the relevant vendor's account, only the assigned category will appear. So, the Western food store staff here will only see the Western food category, while the beverage store staff, they will only see the beverage category. Next, let's dive into report management for a food court restaurant. After setting up menu items, configuring vendors, and assigning POS to the relevant vendors or central cashier, you should be able to access the relevant reports on your POS. However, some reports may require certain permissions to be enabled before they become visible. In this section, I will walk you through the key reports and their corresponding permissions to ensure you can view the correct data on your POS. Let's start with the Sales by Vendor report, which is a report specifically designed for food court operations and is not available in other restaurant modes. The Sales by Vendor report generates data based on the sales from each vendor over a selected operational period. This report provides a clear overview of the total net sales contributed by each vendor, helping to track their sales performance within the chosen time frame. For example, as a Western food store staff, if I want to check today's sales, I can access the Sales by Vendor report on my POS. Then, regardless of whether the order was placed through my own POS or by the central cashier, as long as the items belong to my store, they will be included in this report. This allows me to monitor how much I have sold throughout the day. And to view this report, you will first need to ensure that the proper permission is enabled. You can manage this permission either via the POS or the merchant portal. For this demonstration, I will show you how to enable the permission directly through the POS. First, on your POS, go to Settings. Under Users and Permission, select Role Permission and choose the roles for which you want to enable this report. In this example, I will select the Western food store staff. Scroll down to the bottom until you find Report Permission. Enable the Sales by Vendor report permission and click Update to confirm your changes. And now, after relogging into my Western food store staff account, I will be able to see the Sales by Vendor report available on my POS. Okay, the next report we will look at is the Shift report, which provides a summary of all transactions processed on a POS terminal by a staff during their shift. Similar to other restaurant service mode, you will only see the transactions in the Shift report if the order was placed on that specific POS. For example, if an order is placed and payment is completed at the Western food store, the transaction will only appear on the Western food store's POS and will not be visible on the central cashier POS. And vice versa, if the order is placed and payment is completed at the central cashier, you will not see the transaction on the Western food store's POS. To ensure that the Shift report displays correctly, make sure that the POS is assigned to the correct vendor in your merchant portal, as we demonstrated at the beginning of the video. Lastly, let's look at the daily closing report, which is only visible on POS terminals assigned as the central cashier. For example, on my central cashier POS, you will see the total sales accumulated for the day, regardless of whether the orders were placed on the vendor POS or the central cashier POS since the beginning of the day. However, vendors will not see this report on their POS terminals. Instead, they can access it through the merchant portal. For example, if I log in into my Western food store staff account on the merchant portal, the daily closing report will only display the sales of my store without including the sales of other vendors. Alright, now that you have gained a solid understanding of how to set up and manage food court using Eats365 system, whether you are setting up vendors, configuring reports, or customizing workflows, you are now well prepared to take your operation to the next level. But of course, if you run into any challenges along the way, don't worry, just reach out and we'll be more than happy to assist. Okay, with that, I would say it's a wrap for today's session. Thank you for joining me in this webinar, and I will see you guys soon in the next video. Goodbye and have a great day ahead.